Born and brought up in Mumbai, Dr. Priya Saikiran completed his schooling there in Mumbai. Before moving to Mumbai, pursued her dental studies. After graduating in dentistry, she began private practice and has been serving her patients for the past 27 years. She was drawn to Swami's divine fold in 1991, a blessing that has profoundly shaped her personal and professional life. The newly inaugurated dental unit at Saiprem's Medical Center saw a young Dr. Priya Saikiran joining the services alongside the dental specialist here. That meaningful beginning blossomed into a lasting journey of service, and she remains actively associated with this medical center at Saiprem to this very day. We request Dr. Priya Saikiran to share her experiences on the topic of presence to omnipresence and over to the Sairam.
Sairam, everyone. With humility and devotion, I offer my pranams at the lotus feet of my beloved Swami and pray that every word that I speak today carries his love and the message that he wants to share. I remember reading a very beautiful message in one of our Saiprem WhatsApp groups recently. It said, Swami always finds a way to get his message across to us, leaving us in no doubt that he is behind it. May the message that is meant for each and every one of you today reach you. The last time I stood at this podium in Saiprem was back in 1997 or 98 during a youth sadhana camp. Today, nearly 3 decades later, Swami has called me back here again. The good news is I have gained a little bit of wisdom. The bad news is I now need reading glasses to find it in my notes. Life has a remarkable way of bringing us back to where our deepest lessons had once begun. Years ago, I stood here as a bright-eyed youth. Today I return carrying the blessings and lessons of a lifetime. What I'm about to share today are some of my most personal experiences, moments I hold very close to my heart. They're not just memories, they're living reminders of Swami's love and the countless ways in which he has held my hand through life's journey. A disclaimer before I begin. I am neither an eloquent speaker nor a learned scholar. I am just an ordinary soul, blessed beyond measure to have experienced the extraordinary depths of Swami's love and compassion in my life. I was born and raised in a traditional South Indian Brahmin family. I have been blessed with wonderful parents who, despite living abroad all their lives, remain one of the simplest, most down-to-earth people I've ever known. Growing up, I've learned that your surroundings don't define you, your values do. My mother, who's always been very spiritually inclined, nurtured my faith from a very young age. Whenever fear or anxiety arose, I turned to God for comfort. My childhood, although it was in Dubai, was shaped not by sports clubs and skating rinks, but Vishnu Sahasranam recitation and Bhagavad Gita classes. I first heard of Swami when I was around 15 years old. We were invited to a Sai Bhajan at a friend's place. That evening changed something within me. Swami has often said that music is the easiest vehicle to transport the human heart to the divine. And I felt an undeniable pull the moment I heard his bhajans. The Satya Sai Center, Dubai, was very far from our home. And since my parents were not devotees at the time, I was hesitant to ask them to take me there. Little did I know that Swami was already arranging everything in the background. It so happened that an auntie in our Vishnu Sahasranam group was one of the lead singers in the Satya Sai Center. Not only that, she also happened to live right next to our building and warmly offered to take me for bhajans every week. Looking back, there were too many coincidences for it to have been accidental. It was definitely Swami's hand at work. The bhajans stirred something deep within me, and slowly Swami began carving a place for himself in my heart. And yet, that quiet doubt always remained. Could this orange-robed, curly-haired man actually be God? He answered my question in a way that left me with unwavering conviction. Physics was a subject I struggled with. I could never quite wrap my head around its laws, concepts, reasoning. As my final practical exams approached, my anxiety reached its peak. So the system was that we were required to draw a chit that would determine the two experiments we had to perform on the day of the exam. Out of the entire curriculum, I was fairly comfortable in just 2 experiments. But the chances of those two being paired together and ending up in my hands seemed almost impossible. After a sleepless night filled with fear and worry, I turned to Swami and made what now seems like a very childish bargain. I said, Swami, if you are truly God, you will see to it that the 2 experiments I know get paired together and I draw that very chit. And if that happens, I will never question your divinity ever again. On the day of the exam, when I reached into that box and unfolded my chit, those were the exact 2 experiments written on it. Even today, I wonder what reason Swami had to prove himself to an anxious, confused 15-year-old sitting in some unnoticed corner of the world. There was no need, yet he reached out to me, not because of my worthiness, but because his love knows no measure and his patience knows no limits. I think that moment remains as one of the clearest reminders that divine grace is not something that we always deserve. It is something that is very lovingly given. My faith had now been firmly cemented and there was no turning back. Although my parents were not devotees at the time, they never once stood in the way of my visits to the Satya Sai Center. In fact, in their own quiet way, they were unknowingly following the very teachings that Swami stands for: truth, love, compassion, righteousness, and of course, eventually, in his own inimitable way, Swami drew them into his fold. My mother went on to become a Bal Vikas Guru and later on served as the Bal Vikas coordinator for Satya Sai Center Dubai for almost 5 years. Looking back, I can only marvel at how patiently and beautifully Swami orchestrated every step of my family's journey to him. After completing my 12th standard, I moved to Mumbai to pursue dentistry. Although I began living with my grandmother and uncle, it was an exciting new chapter in my life, but it felt greatly overwhelming. I was not used to commuting by local trains or spending long hours traveling to and from college. By the time I reached my uncle's place every evening, I was physically exhausted and emotionally depleted. But what made it even harder was that quiet sense of spiritual isolation. There were no Sai devotees in my family. Nobody who could guide me to the Sai center or even understand what Swami meant to me. And I longed for that connection. Then, one ordinary evening when I was home, completing an assignment, I heard the familiar strains of a Sai bhajan. I remember the exact bhajan even today. It was Mrityunjaya Namo. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then another bhajan followed, and then another. My heart racing, I ran to the window and realized that the bhajans were coming from a ground floor flat of the neighboring building. Without a second thought, I rushed there. By the time I reached there, the aarti had begun. It was a small family bhajan that I had literally barged into. They looked at me with amusement as I stood in front of Swami's altar, crying uncontrollably, yet feeling a joy I cannot even begin to describe. It may sound strange today, but those were the days before the internet and social media. While living amongst people who did not believe in Swami or had never even heard of Swami, finding a Sai community seemed nothing short of a miracle. After explaining my situation, the loving auntie of that house warmly embraced me and promised to take me along with her for all the bhajans that were going to be held in the neighborhood. And just like that, during one of the loneliest, most uncertain phases of my life, when I felt completely lost and disconnected, Swami reached out to me through that invisible, unbreakable Prema Bandhanam, sacred bond of divine love. A love that never judges, never weakens, and never lets go. He found me, comforted me, and gently drew me back home to me. During my second year of dentistry, I returned home to Dubai for my usual Diwali break. What started out as a routine vacation soon turned into a life-altering experience. I developed a fever which refused to subside with the usual medications. The doctors prescribed some antibiotics trying to control whatever infection was causing the fever. As the days passed, my condition only worsened. Growing increasingly concerned, my parents decided to admit me to the hospital. By then, my health had deteriorated to such an extent that I lost consciousness and slipped into a coma. After undergoing several tests at the hospital, I was diagnosed with cerebral malaria and acute renal failure, a condition in which the malaria parasites had traveled to my brain and my kidneys had stopped functioning. The doctors tried their best to get me out of the comatose state. Nothing seemed to be working. My parents were caught in a state of helplessness and despair while the doctors gently prepared them for the worst. Then, an extraordinary turn of events unfolded. A specialist doctor had been flown in all the way from London to treat the president of the United Arab Emirates, the country in which I was living. After completing his duties at the Royal Palace, he was taken on a tour of all the hospitals in the country. He happened to visit the ICU in which I was admitted. and for reasons I will never fully understand, he took a special interest in my case, decided to stay back in the country and personally oversee my treatment. Can you imagine a super specialist flown in to treat the president of the country was now going to be my primary care physician? To me, it was Swami's immense love and concern manifesting in the most extraordinary way. Dr. Harris's treatment plan worked, and after 5 long days, I finally regained consciousness. My parents now breathed a sigh of relief after days of fearing the worst. The very first thing I told my mother when I was finally able to speak was, I saw Swami. I have no memory of the 5 days spent in coma, no recollection of the hospital or the countless anxious moments my parents would have endured. The only thing I remember was having seen Bhagwan. In that experience, I'm lying on a bed with my mother sitting on one side and a nun sitting on the other. I could hear the faint, almost ethereal sound of the Hanuman Chalisa being played very softly, as though reaching me through some other world. I remember hearing my mother's voice. She kept calling out to me, asking me to wake up, gently pleading for me to wake up. Her voice breaking with emotion, and she finally whispered, "Wake up, Priya, see, Swami has come." Then, in a moment that remains etched in my soul forever, when I opened my eyes, I saw Swami emerge out of a mirror on my parents' wardrobe, his hand raised in Abhayahasta and wearing one of the most beautiful, reassuring smiles I have ever seen. A smile of love, protection, and an unspoken promise that everything would be alright. I tried desperately to rise up from the bed and reach out to him, but in that very instant, I was pulled back into consciousness. Suddenly, I was back in the ICU, surrounded by machines, monitors, and the hurried footsteps of the doctors and nurses who were overjoyed to see me awake. I could see the overwhelming relief and answered prayers reflected on my parents' faces. I never got to speak to Dr. Harris or properly thank him. He left as soon as I regained consciousness. It felt as though he was an angel sent by Swami, arriving only to look after me during my darkest moments before disappearing quietly. After spending a few more days in the ICU, I was transferred to the renal unit because my kidneys were not functioning. The treatment was painful and I was tired and longing to go back home. It was November 23rd. As I lay on my hospital bed, I couldn't help but think of the birthday celebrations that would be taking place in the Sai Center, and my heart ached at the thought of missing it all. I offered a silent prayer to Swami from my hospital room, asking him to accept my pranams from afar. That night, after dinner had been cleared and the lights turned off, I closed my eyes to rest. Suddenly, someone walked into my room. It was an auntie from the Sai Center. She was dressed in a heavy Kanjivaram sari, and she looked like she had come directly from the birthday celebrations. In her hand, she held a photograph of Swami and a packet of vibhuti. I was shocked to see her. The security at the renal unit was exceptionally strict. They rarely allowed visitors during the daytime, let alone at night. When I asked her, "How did you manage to get past security?" She simply smiled and said, "Nobody stopped me." I think Swami's love opened doors which rules could not. She walked up to me and placed Swami's photograph and a packet of devotee in my hands. And at that moment, I felt an incredible sense of peace and comfort. But the miracle did not end there. This devotee had come all the way from Shanti and had reached her just a day earlier. It seems Swami had given it to her sister with the instructions, send it to Dubai. Her sister, anxious and worried, had called her almost immediately. Just moments before receiving that call, this auntie had been briefed about my condition and the fact that I was very pregnant. She instantly knew that the vibhuti was meant for me. And that's how it reached me on Swami's birthday. What greater proof of Swami's omnipresence would I ever require? Even in the times of pain and illness, time and again, he found a way to remind you that he was always watching you. The doctors had warned my parents that I could face many complications due to the coma, the brain swelling, and the kidney failure. But by Swami's grace, I walked out of the hospital healthy and whole. When I returned for my follow-up, 15 days later, the doctors could barely recognize me. In fact, the head of the renal unit had to actually review my file to confirm that I was that same patient whom they thought would never wake up, let alone return with all her faculties intact. To this day, I know that my life has been gifted back to me through Swami's boundless love and grace. I soon returned to Mumbai to complete my medical studies. I moved to Nerul to avoid the long daily commute to college. What started out as a practical decision became yet another expression of Swami's love. To my utter joy, Swami led me to Saiprem in October 1995, where I was embraced by this incredible community of devotees. So many of them are here even today. Uma Aunty, Mahesh, I'm filled with gratitude to see them here. Amid service and devotion, Swami quietly wrote some of the most important chapters of my life story right here in Saiprem. I remember it was the year 1996 when we sat for Path Namaskar after Prashanti Seva. We were nearly 1,500 of us from Maharashtra. The possibility of Swami walking past and granting each one of us Path Namaskar seemed incredibly slim. And yet, as always, Swami's love proved otherwise. They were given strict instructions not to take up too much of Swami's time. We could either give a letter or a photograph of Messi, or we could take Path Namaskar. I had written a small note expressing my gratitude to Bhagwan for everything that he had done for me. But in that moment, I decided not to give it to him because I didn't want to miss the chance of taking up Path Namaskar. As Swami walked towards me, he gestured for the note to be handed over to him. After accepting it, he paused to read it while I quickly took my Path Namaskar. In that moment, it felt as though he was acknowledging his hand in each and every event that had unfolded in my life. His grace that had protected me and healed me, and accepting the gratitude that I now carried in my heart. I continued to feel this love in almost every phase of my life. I think one of the most life-changing and miraculous phases in a woman's life is the blessing of becoming a mother. During that time of my life, Swami, who embodies the love of 1,000 mothers, protected my baby and brought her back from the jaws of death. My daughter Mahika was born at 27 weeks, weighing barely 885 grams. Due to her extreme prematurity, her lungs had not developed and she was unable to breathe. She was placed in an incubator for 3 long months, during which time we lived with the fear of losing her every single day. As Mahika lay in the incubator, my husband and I would sit beside her and sing Swami's bhajans, filling the entire NICU with Swami's loving presence. The date, 18th February 2004, will remain forever etched in my memory. It was Mahashivratri that year. When I arrived at the hospital in the morning, Mahika's incubator was no longer in the NICU. Fearing the worst, my heart skipped a beat. I was informed that she had been moved to isolation, meaning kept in a separate enclosure after developing some sort of an infection. After much begging and pleading, they allowed me to sit beside her. As I sat next to her and watched, I noticed her breathing was extremely shallow and unsteady, despite being connected to the respirator. I sat there singing Swami's bhajans. All of a sudden, the machines and monitors she was connected to began beeping wildly. And before I could even process what was happening, I noticed the steady rhythm of her heartbeat fade into a single endless line. I stood there helplessly watching my baby's heart stop beating. On hearing the alarms, doctors and nurses rushed in and started desperately trying to revive her while I was asked to wait outside. I stood outside begging Swami to save my baby's life. After what seemed like an eternity, they were finally able to revive her. Then, something extraordinary happened. With every passing hour, her breathing seemed to get stronger and stronger, as though an unseen hand was gently breathing life and strength into her fragile body. By the very next day, she was breathing on her own and she was taken off the respirator. A moment, nothing short of a miracle to us. The doctors could not fully explain this sudden turnaround. Medicine seemed to have done all it could, yet something beyond human understanding had touched her life. We knew it was none other than Swami's love carrying her back to us. I had with me a black and white photograph of Swami in which he is standing under what looked like palm leaves. For some reason, whenever I would look at that photograph, it would quieten my fears and I would feel comforted. So I had it framed and placed at my bedside. That night, when I returned home from the hospital, still shaken and unsettled, I noticed that devotee had appeared on Swami's image on that very photograph. In that moment, I knew that neither my baby nor I had ever been alone. Swami had been watching over us all along, like a mother, silently protecting and guarding her children. The doctors had warned us that the road ahead would be tough. Mahika would face many developmental challenges due to her prematurity. But brothers and sisters, through every anxious moment, every milestone that I worried about, every sleepless night, Swami held my hand and watched over her with infinite love and care. Step by step, he carried her forward and she blossomed into a strong, healthy, happy child. Today, Mahika stands as a living testament to Swami's love and miracles. This divine love continued to embrace each and every member of my family. When my son was 7 years old, he developed an eye infection. Both his eyes turned red. There was persistent discharge and constant burning sensation. Looking at and the symptoms refused to subside despite consultation with so many ophthalmologists. Looking at his pain and discomfort, I asked my little boy to write a letter to Swami, asking for help. In his innocence, he poured his heart out to Bhagavan, even mentioning the names of the ophthalmologists, the names of the eye drops, its dosage and timings. But instead of improving, his condition worsened, and that too after starting a fresh set of medicines prescribed by a very renowned, experienced ophthalmologist. Anxious and frustrated, standing in front of Swami's photograph, I broke down. I asked Swami in my helplessness, "Are you merely a picture? Did you not read these letters? Can you not see his pain and suffering?" At that exact moment, I received a phone call from the doctor, reassuring me that my son's symptoms would first get worse before healing actually began. And just as assured by him, within a week, my son's eyes healed completely. It felt uncanny that such a busy doctor, whom I had met just once the previous day, would take the time out to call me personally at the exact moment that I was standing in front of Swami's photograph and crying for help. To me, it felt not like the doctor's voice, but Swami himself comforting me and reminding me that he was listening to every prayer, reading every letter, and responding through every photograph. Swami often says, "My photograph is also me, but I'm not limited to a picture." I felt that ever-living presence. Once again, Navi. I could go on sharing story after story, but before I conclude, I'd like to briefly mention one more incident that holds a very special place in my heart. In 2013, my husband suffered a stroke. It was one of the most frightening experiences of our life. And yet, through it all, we felt Swami's hand guiding us at every step, right from reaching the hospital on time to getting the treatment required to make a complete recovery. Swami took care of every detail. Even our health insurance became an instrument of his grace. It became active on the very day my husband was admitted. The insurance company initially dismissed the claim, saying they were unable to accept what they considered an extraordinary coincidence. We knew it was no coincidence. It was Swami taking care of what would have otherwise been a huge financial burden. My husband's surgery was scheduled to take place at Bridge Candy Hospital. Upon our arrival there, we were informed that the surgery had been moved to a completely different hospital. At that time, we could not understand the reason for this sudden change. It felt like an unnecessary delay, adding to our anxiety. But this detour to Bridge Candy Hospital led us to meet Dr Priya, who gave my husband a special devotee he had received just a few days earlier. Only then did we realize the deeper significance of what had happened. Swami had led us to Bridge Candy Hospital for only one reason, so that my husband could receive his devotee before the surgery. What appeared to be a confusing change of plans was actually a very powerful reminder that Swami's love was protecting us for the journey ahead. This is the extent of love and care that Swami has shown for each and every member of my family. Silent, constant, and beyond human understanding. I pray that the bond each one of us shares with Swami continues to grow stronger, deeper, and more unwavering with every passing day, and that we continue to feel His guiding presence. My heartfelt gratitude to Swami for giving me a chance to speak today. Although this satsang was barely 30 minutes, I found myself spending hours reflecting on His kindness and reliving so many memories. It almost felt as though Swami was wanting to remind me, have you forgotten how I held your hand through every step, every joy, every challenge? Look back and see how I've carried you through every phase of your life journey. Today is a beautiful reminder that His hand has never left mine, even when I fail to notice it. And for that grace, I'm eternally thankful. A very big thank you to all of you for listening so patiently as I shared just a few glimpses of how profoundly Swami has showered my life with His love. Thank you, Sairam.